didn't throw it away, did he?
He's doing that a lot, isn't he, this year? He's just having those really, really nice first laps. It just puts him in a position.
He's cracking on the first lap.
It's just like that car does not deserve to be in the position that he's putting it in at the end of the first lap. And actually, it's a horrible racer's cliche, but he races from there, doesn't he? He does something with it. I mean, he does slip back, but that's just him regressing to the mean of the car, isn't it? I think he's actually doing a very good job to even be in that fight to begin with.
Yeah, I think racing-wise, and we saw this last year as well, Stroll, when he got track position, was generally pretty tidy, and he's quite aggressive on the opening lap. I don't want us to get too carried away with him, because he did shunt in Friday practice. He did shunt really oddly in qualifying when he had the understeer moment in the right-hander turn 12, the sort of medium speed right-hander, and he had this big understeer, and rather than dealing with it, he just sort of thought, well, I'll just sort of keep going.
Just carry on understeering.
And then when I run wide, I'll just sort of boot it a bit and see what happens. And surprisingly enough, he ended up in the wall. So that was a little bit odd. But no, I do agree, on race day, he's doing a decent enough job, and it's a fool's errand almost driving a Williams a lot of the time at the moment. So we can't, he came out with 11th place, and he reckoned with a few more laps he'd have been able to pass Leclerc.
Carry On Understeering is not a film starring Kenneth Williams, Kenneth Cope, Joan Sims, Bernard Bresslaw, Sid James, and sundry other comedians of the 1950s.
You've run out of Carry On cast members to cite.
Do you know, it's so late at night. If this were an episode of Just a Minute and I were Clement Freud, and it was a little bit earlier in the day, I probably would have gone for a full minute. Jim Dale.
Bernie Bresslaw?
I'd done Bernard Bresslaw.
Oh,
repetition.
There we go. So yeah, that just shows how much I pay attention to what you're saying. My role as host is mainly just waiting for you to finish, so that I can make a rather long and rambling point.
It's a bit like being at an FIA press conference, isn't it? With all these journalists who just sit and wait for someone else to stop talking so that they can ask an identikit question. But anyhow, Scott.
Who could you be referring
I can't be. Not Scott.
I'm sat right here, guys.
Barely. You're at a very jaunty angle on your giant cushion.
I had to shuffle forward so I could lay back a minute ago and stretch my lower back out.
I have to say, I know what these are called an ottoman, aren't they?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Aren't ottomans
like
circular though? I always think of ottomans as circular.
I don't know. Certainly not the people who sang "Yes, sir, I can boogie." But anyhow, let's proceed.
This is where we end up when it's 1 o'clock in the morning, isn't it? Well, let's just have a look. Have we told the full story of the top five? Yeah, Daniel Ricciardo. He also had a sneaky off at the previous restart at Kampsa. Took a bite of the gravel. So a little bit of a messy race for him, but he did. I think he ended up with fastest lap, didn't he? He was setting some good pace.
He set the fastest lap quite a few times as the fuel load came down.
So yeah, a solid race for Red Bull. He said it was what was it? He said felt pain at their relative qualifying pace.
Yeah, I think he was hurt a little bit, wasn't he? That's what he said. A little bit hurt at the gap to Hamilton because Red Bull brought a pretty tasty side pod upgrade, didn't they, for this race, and they're pushing like hell to get the most out of the car because they are still massively struggling with the Renault engine in qualifying in particular. It just isn't a match for Ferrari and Mercedes, and Ricciardo, I think, was hoping for a little bit more. So when Lewis put in that pole lap and Bottas was super close behind him, 0.04 of a second or something like that, for the Red Bulls to end up, I think, 7 tenths back. I think Ricciardo was like, yeah, we're really in trouble.
Because they'd been just 3 tenths off after their first Q3 runs, hadn't they? So
and they've been so much closer this year than last year. As a general rule, take the first 4 races of this year to last year. And Red Bull, I think, had halved their qualifying deficit from 2017. And then here, way back up over a half a second again. And it's just like, you take 1 step forward and then all of a sudden you're nudged back again. So it can't be easy for Ricciardo or Verstappen, especially when you know that you're just sort of waiting for Sunday and then you just try and make progress from where you can. And then you get to a track like Barcelona and it'll be the same in Monaco. If they're on the 3rd row again they're just going to toil around in 5th and 6th waiting for a Ferrari to retire or something like that.
All things are relative though, because of course McLaren brought a huge update package and they're still over a second off Red Bull.
Yeah, well, they got lapped. Alonso got lapped by Verstappen. I don't know if he got lapped by Ricciardo as well, but McLaren got lapped by Red Bull, and that is just the best possible for us anyway, and everyone watching, the best possible indicator of how much work that programme still needs to do to get anywhere near its stated ambitions of fighting for podiums and wins.
Well, to put some numbers on it, McLaren's been about 2.5% off the pace in the previous 4 races this season, which was almost bang on to within a few thousandths the same as the average performance over the 2017 season with Honda engines. So they'd basically gone nowhere. Barcelona, they were about 0.5% closer to the front. Now, I would say Barcelona was a track where I'd expect them to be a bit closer anyway, because it's not so power dependent. Track configuration, you'd expect them to be a little bit closer. So even though they've got this spectacular nose job and they had a few other little bits, a little bit of a diffuser tweak, and the kind of first part of the barge, well, the leading deflector had been tweaked a little bit, I don't think there's anything transformative there. So, another very fine drive from Fernando Alonso to 8th, but yeah, certainly not transformative for McLaren. But to come back to your point, Scott, about the Red Bull performance, I think there was something very encouraging for Monaco for Red Bull, in that the last sector at Barcelona is always a pretty good indicator for Monaco in terms of it being relatively slow, and you have the chicane that's kind of the dominant lap time influencer in that part. And if you look at it, Daniel Ricciardo was the fastest there, admittedly only a small amount ahead of Vettel, but that kind of shows that maybe at a track like Monaco, Red Bull might have a shot at trying to do something. That's in qualifying they were quickest, and then Ricciardo, I think, also set the fastest time in that sector in the race as well. So that's something for them to hang on to. And in fact, Hamilton pointed to that performance in the final sector after the race as a reason to be a little bit concerned about Monaco.
Yeah, and Max referenced it after the race as well as a reason to be positive for Monaco. So yeah, there's definitely a chance there. Especially the other thing with Monaco is obviously it's something that's driver influenced, and we've seen a couple of times this year, more than a couple in fact, where Kimi has been very, very quick in the other Ferrari and not quite put it together on his Q3 lap. And if he does that in Monaco, then he's going to find himself a comfortable 6th, because I think Ricciardo and Verstappen are going to be going all guns blazing in qualifying in Monte Carlo, just to try and sort of, that's their sniff of a chance, isn't it? Maybe Hungary is another place where they can get in amongst it. But until they get a substantial improvement from Renault, Red Bull are going to be targeting Monaco as their only real chance of success. So I'm looking forward to see what they do on Saturday in particular, because it could be quite spectacular. On
the Hypersofts.
Yes, the tyre that Daniel Ricciardo wants to see everywhere, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I'm sure the Hypersoft would have been a delightful tyre at Barcelona. I'm not sure that would have worked especially well, even though it was getting some decent lap times in testing, but slightly different conditions. Well, let's look a little bit further down. Kevin Magnussen in 6th place. Now, there's very, very little to say about Kevin Magnussen's weekend. In practice, he was very good. In qualifying, he was very good and best of the rest. In the race, aside from that little wobble he had in turn 3 that did kind of cause Grosjean to have a spin, other than that brief moment that maybe, without what happened behind, might have cost him a place in normal circumstances. And in the race, he drove around initially in 7th and then in 6th, broke away from all his competitors. It was a boringly superb performance from him. And
he was picking up personal bests. He was going green quite regularly as the track rubbered in again, and the fuel loads came down. Because I suppose that's the other thing we should probably also mention, is that we had a humdinger of a thunderstorm last night. The night before last, as it is now, nearly the early hours of the morning, that will have made the track pretty green again.
I think Magnussen was excellent this weekend, as you say. You can't really say too much about the weekend, because he was exactly the same in every single session, which is just consistent, excellent, and ultimately he is doing everything for Haas at the moment. And I don't just mean that from the sense of, he's qualifying well and getting good results. Like, he is literally doing everything for Haas, because Grosjean's extended his pointless run, hasn't he?
Yeah, 9 races without a point now, and Roman Grosjean, well, up to turn 3, Kevin Magnussen has the wobble in front of him.
Grosjean had a cracking first 2 corners.
Well, there we go. So that's do another. I was trying to calculate in my head how many corners there were in the whole race, but that kind of maths is beyond me at 1:05 in the morning. Grosjean blamed the spin on Magnussen's wobble in front of him. So, Codders,
no.
What do you make of that initially, and then what do you make of what happened after the spin had started?
Well, it's a very interesting excuse, and I had the pleasure of transcribing team boss Gunter Steiner's entire press conference, which went on for quite a long time, because it was broken up by him being pulled aside by a team member to be apprised of the outcome of the stewards' investigation, and
which was a 3-place grid drop, wasn't it?
It was, which
and
actually
2 penalty points. No, it was 2 penalty points.
Two
on his license as
two
well,
penalty points on his license, and the the 3-place grid drop for Monaco is especially harsh because, of course, Monaco, your grid position's everything. But that's kind of by the by. I slightly bought it, but I kind of thought that Magnussen was quite a distance ahead, certainly from the in-car camera. That's tricky to make too much of a value judgment of because you do get a foreshortening effect. And we are talking about milliseconds. That is a really, really quick sequence of corners. You know, we've all stood there in races and testing in times past. It's really quick. And sometimes if you do make an adjustment, your tyres aren't really warm enough, you can get a little bit of a spin and it can suck you out onto the wider part of the corner. So that begs the question, how did Grosjean end up coming back into the corner and causing such carnage?
Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, I can actually accept. I think maybe there was a little bit of caution there because it was his teammate, and the last thing you want to do is go into the back of him. He said over the radio it did cost him a little bit of air as well in terms of the downforce and turbulence. So I can kind of accept the fact he lost it. But Scott, then once the spin has begun.
Well, once the spin has begun, what you don't do is boot the throttle. And not only cause your car to rotate in the middle of the track when 13 other cars are coming towards you, and the fact that you've lit your tyres up produces a massive cloud of tyre smoke, which blinds the rest of the field, wipes out 2 competitors. Very, very lucky that it didn't wipe out more. And,
yeah, they were just driving into a smoke screen, weren't they?
And I just can't buy the argument that was placed before the stewards, which is that Grosjean thought that was the best way of not it collecting anyone or being collected by anyone. I guess his argument was that if it bit, if he had grip, he would shoot to the inside of the track.
Steiner's explanation of it was that he would have likely have come to a halt in the middle of the track, in which case he would probably have been collected by 5 or more other cars, which does have an element of plausibility to it. But we've all seen cars spin, and when a car spins, you never quite know where it's going to end up. And as I was talking to a few people in the paddock this afternoon, I was taken back to a sunny afternoon in California many, many years ago, the 1999 American Le Mans Series round at Sears Point, where Alex Caffey, driving a Ferrari 333 SP, had an enormous shunt exiting a left-hander. Steve Soper in a BMW V12 LMR behind him thinking, ooh, where am I going to go? And Soper thinks that the Ferrari is going to end up driver's right, so Soper tries to go left. But as Steve himself said, I tried to go left, but the bloody thing wouldn't turn. So I went right. And as it happened, as it sort of crazily rotated away to the right, the car just sort of caught a little bit and then went to the left. So Soper, having thought he was going to have an epic T-boning shunt, just cruised straight through unscathed, and Caffey disappeared off and smithereened his Ferrari into the wall, driver's left. And it's when a car rotates, you really can't predict where it's going to end up. So to say I made a millisecond decision to avoid coming to a halt in the middle of the track, I
think he tried to hang on to it for too long. He should have bailed out earlier and just got on the brakes and dealt with it. I had the commentary. The commentary that comes through the app is the Radio 5 Live BBC commentary feed, and they have Jolyon Palmer there, who was a very insightful commentator, and he referenced, I think it was Sochi last year, when Palmer had an off, and he did a similar thing, and he kept it lit. And Palmer was quite critical of what Grosjean did, but he said, well, last year I incorrectly kept it lit and took Grosjean out, and he was really furious at me and was saying, well, why did you keep on the power? So Grosjean has been on the receiving end of that.
Presumably he said purr. I think in this case the stewards were bang on, and we have to agree with the finding of the victory. They were actually quite scathing in the document, as scathing as stewards can be, and in my opinion, quite rightly.
Yeah, it's a shame because I do think Grosjean's got a lot of ability when